Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 2013 movie titled Red 2. Please be advised that there will be spoilers ahead. The film begins with Frank Moses, a former CIA operative, who is attempting to lead a quiet life with his girlfriend, Sarah Ross. As they shop for items to furnish their home, Frank senses a lurking presence nearby. This turns out to be Marvin Boggs, another ex-operative, who is gripped by paranoia and believes they are still being hunted. He insists they must leave immediately, but Frank is reluctant to disrupt the peaceful life he has built with Sarah. When Sarah returns with food, she is intrigued by Marvin's urgent warnings.
Last chance, Frank.
Taking Sarah home.
Stay safe.
But Frank chooses to dismiss him. As Marvin drives away, his car suddenly explodes, raising suspicions about his fate. At Marvin's funeral, Frank remains unconvinced of his friend's death, despite Sarah urging him to pay his respects. In the church, Frank's instincts compel him to poke Marvin's body with a pin to confirm he's truly dead, but Sarah intervenes, asking him to behave. When the time comes for someone to speak, Sarah encourages Frank to share a few words.
Sir.
Marvin, he was paranoid. He could wire a bomb.
He was a really good friend. We're gonna miss him.
After the funeral, Frank suggests they relocate to avoid becoming targets themselves. Just then, FBI agents arrive to take him into custody for questioning. He instructs Sarah to go to his safe house and wait for him. Meanwhile, Jack Horton, a U.S. intelligence agent, arrives at the holding facility under the guise of Frank's lawyer but quickly reveals his true intentions by killing the secretary and coercing the facility's head into revealing Frank's whereabouts before killing him too. As Frank is interrogated about a covert Cold War operation known as Nightshade, he maintains that he knows nothing. Horton and his team of mercenaries are on their way to the interrogation room. A young FBI agent left in charge of Frank warns him that they need to release him because danger is imminent. Just as he hands Frank a key for escape, Horton arrives and guns down the agent. It becomes clear that Horton knows all about Frank's past. He once idolized him and now serves as the government's ruthless enforcer for extracting information. Horton threatens Sarah's life, revealing he has been surveilling her even during private moments. This pushes Frank over the edge. He breaks free and takes a mercenary hostage.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pretty good for a retired guy.
However, Horton kills the mercenary, forcing Frank to seek cover. One mercenary investigates a noise but is swiftly dragged away, prompting others to open fire indiscriminately. Utilizing his skills, Frank sets a grenade trap that detonates while he escapes through a window. He then moves stealthily through the chaos, taking out mercenaries one by one. Just when it seems he might be caught, Marvin reappears to save him, and together they make their way outside where they find Sarah. Frank chastises Marvin for involving her in such perilous circumstances, but Sarah asserts her strength and determination not to be treated like a fragile doll. Marvin reveals that documents have surfaced implicating both him and Frank in Operation Nightshade, though they refrain from discussing it further. Concerned for Sarah's safety, Frank urges her to go into hiding, but she refuses to leave him and embraces the thrill of their situation. Their conversation is interrupted when they hear banging from the trunk of Marvin's car. Upon investigation, they discover a senior intelligence officer whom Marvin has been interrogating. Horton and Senior Intelligence Officer Davis convene with the general who oversaw Operation Nightshade back in '79, attempting to reassure him that they will successfully contain Frank and Marvin. Despite their assurances, the general expresses grave concern over a document that has surfaced and insists on making a public statement. In response, Davis discreetly signals Horton, who proceeds to suffocate the general to death, all while plotting to call in a specialist named Han to manage the escalating situation. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, we are introduced to Han, a former niche operative turned freelance assassin, as he executes a mission. After his guards strip him of his clothing and provide him with a robe, he is led to meet a client who has contracted him to eliminate a man named Mr. Fernandez. Unbeknownst to Han, Fernandez is actually the one who has hired him, and in a twist of fate, he kills the client using origami paper as a lethal weapon. Shortly after, Han receives a call from Horton, learning that his old rival, Frank Moses, is involved. Back in the intelligence world, MI6 Director Phillips is alerted to the Nightshade leak and demands to know the whereabouts of Vittorio Winslow. He tracks her down to a hotel room where several dead bodies lie on the floor. Undeterred by the grim scene, Phillips offers her a mission and urges her to choose a side in this unfolding conflict. Meanwhile, Frank and Sarah observe Marvin as he interrogates the intelligence officer. Sarah feels exhilarated at the prospect of being on a mission with Frank, expressing her belief that despite the danger they face, he is exactly where he belongs. The intelligence officer reveals that the Nightshade operation was orchestrated by a rogue U.S. general, involving the smuggling of a nuclear device into Moscow as a first strike capability, which ultimately went missing. He also discloses that Edward Bailey was the scientist behind the Nightshade bomb. Frank and Marvin recall their time as Bailey's security detail during his ill-fated trip to Moscow, where he was killed in a car bomb explosion, leading them to understand their connection to this dark chapter. Determined to uncover the source of the Nightshade document leak, Frank immediately suspects a figure known as the Frog. Just then, he receives an alarming call from Victoria, who informs him that MI6 has put out a contract for his assassination due to allegations of being a nuclear terrorist, with Han also hired by the Americans for the same purpose. Marvin reacts incredulously, deeming it excessive for Han to be sent after them. On his private jet en route to the USA, Han learns that his team has successfully tracked down Frank. However, upon landing and settling into a hotel room to begin his hunt, he discovers that Frank has stolen his jet from the airport. On board the jet, Marvin reveals that Frank had previously imprisoned Han for several years, making their conflict personal. However, Frank insists they must prioritize finding the Frog. Upon arriving in Paris, they check into their hotel only to find themselves surrounded by operatives led by Katya Petrakovich, a Russian secret agent and Frank's former lover. Katya greets Frank with an unexpected kiss, leaving Sarah momentarily speechless as Marvin explains that she represents Frank's greatest vulnerability. Katya leads them to a private room where she reveals her own investigation into the Nightshade leak and threatens to turn them over to U.S. authorities unless they agree to cooperate with Russian intelligence on the matter. Frank pulls Sarah aside to reassure her that there is nothing romantic between him and Katya, rather, they need her expertise to navigate this dangerous situation. Meanwhile, Horton learns from Davis that Frank is indeed pursuing the Frog. As Frank, Sarah, and Katya sit outside a restaurant where the Frog is dining, Katya explains that he earned his name by poisoning the KGB's water supply using tree frog venom and stealing sensitive information, making him untouchable even for U.S. operatives due to the wealth of intel he possesses. Inside the bustling restaurant, the Frog is engaged in a clandestine meeting with clients when Frank and Sarah make their entrance. Unable to maintain her composure, Sarah locks eyes with the Frog, prompting him to hurl a knife in her direction before unleashing chaos by firing into the crowd. In the ensuing pandemonium, Frank and Katya return fire while Marvin swiftly ushers Sarah to safety. The Frog seizes the opportunity to escape, stealing a bike just as Frank attempts to pursue him. However, Katya arrives in a sleek Porsche, and they take off in hot pursuit of the Frog. Meanwhile, Sarah insists on chasing after him in a smaller car, determined to catch him before Katya does. As the chase unfolds, the Frog loses control and tumbles off his bike, but Sarah's attempt to reach him ends in disaster as she crashes her vehicle. Though the Frog manages to flee once again, Sarah is left stranded, forced to watch helplessly as Frank and Katya apprehend him.
I hate her so much.
They drag the Frog into a nearby building, demanding information about Nightshade while smashing his expensive wine as a form of intimidation. Despite their threats, the Frog remains tight-lipped, unwilling to divulge anything due to his distrust of their intentions. Katya contemplates resorting to torture to extract the truth, but Sarah intervenes, urging them to stop. In an unexpected turn, Sarah begins to charm and seduce the Frog, and to everyone's surprise, her approach proves effective as he reluctantly hands over the key to his deposit box. Frank takes the key and plans a dinner date with Sarah for later that evening. However, their moment is interrupted by a knock at the door. It's Katya, insisting that Frank accompany her to speak with a source. Marvin quickly shuts the door on her, cautioning Frank not to trust her. Undeterred, Frank assures Marvin that he can handle it and apologizes to an irate Sarah, promising he'll return in time for dinner.
Keep her safe. To kill you.
As Frank leaves with Katya, they reminisce about their tumultuous history of attempted assassinations against one another. When Frank inquires about her supposed source, Katya reveals that there is no source. Instead, she intends to steal the key for herself. Frank firmly rejects this plan but soon finds himself succumbing to unconsciousness as Katya has drugged his wine. He awakens later in an apartment with Sarah desperately trying to rouse him back to consciousness. Furious at his naivety for being drugged and allowing the key to be taken, she is met with Marvin's revelation that he anticipated this outcome and had swapped the keys before returning the real one to Frank. The following day, as Frank and Marvin navigate the streets, they are ambushed by Han, who opens fire with a mounted machine gun, showering the sidewalk with bullets and demanding his plane.
You dead yet, Moses? Dead! My plane!
Frank and Marvin scramble for cover as chaos erupts around them. With Han stepping out brandishing 2 pistols, Frank and Marvin manage to escape underground. They then head to the bank where Katya is being taken into custody after Marvin provided authorities with a key link to a terrorist cell. Upon accessing the true deposit box, they uncover an MI6 report on Nightshade that reveals the individual responsible for placing the bomb is currently incarcerated. The trio sets off for England, and while driving along a secluded road, they are intercepted by Victoria wielding a sniper rifle. It turns out Marvin couldn't resist sharing their plans with her. Instead of executing them, Victoria offers assistance in faking their deaths, which should buy them precious time. Meanwhile, Horton is seen brutally interrogating the frog but learns that he must have ingested poison or something similar. He vows to stay on Frank's trail. Victoria joins forces with Frank and Marvin as they devise a plan to infiltrate the prison housing the criminally insane. She manages to get herself admitted into the facility but quickly incapacitates the attendants monitoring her. Allowing Frank inside under the guise of doctors, they take control of the entire staff as hostages, setting the stage for their next move in this high-stakes game of cat and mouse. They track down the cell of the notorious Nightshade prisoner, only to discover that it is Dr. Bailey, who is now frenzied and hyperactive from the drugs administered to him. When they question him about Nightshade, it becomes clear that his current state renders him incapable of providing any useful information. Victoria, sensing a deeper conspiracy, resolves to uncover why MI6 has been covering up Bailey's existence and deliberately allows herself to be captured while Frank makes a daring escape with Bailey. Marvin pilots Frank and Bailey to a Russian airbase, where they find themselves surrounded by soldiers. To their surprise, these troops are under the command of Ivan Simonov, a former Russian general and an old ally of Frank's. Frank attempts once again to extract the location of the bomb from Bailey, but the doctor's mental state remains too unstable for any coherent answers. Upon their arrival in the city, they are ambushed by Han, who fixates on Frank and demands his plane. In a tense confrontation, Han dispatches 2 police officers attempting to apprehend him, but Frank manages to handcuff him to a refrigerator, allowing for his escape. However, before the officers can secure Han, he breaks free and uses the refrigerator door as a weapon against them. Frank takes Bailey to Marvin's safe house, where Sarah questions why Han harbors such intense animosity towards Frank. She learns that Han lost his position as a counterintelligence officer after Frank framed him for stealing classified information. Eager for answers, Sarah presses Bailey about Nightshade once more. This time, he confirms its existence. After leading them on a wild chase through the city for hours, Bailey finally reveals that the Kremlin is the one place no one would think to search for it. He then guides them to a secret entrance hidden behind a Papa John's bathroom. Meanwhile, Victoria finds herself in MI6 custody. She warns Phillips about the imminent threat of the bomb, but he reveals a shocking truth and refuses to let her inform Frank of the danger. Phillips orders her execution, but Victoria fights back, taking out her would-be assassin and making her escape. Bailey and the team use explosives to breach the basement of the Kremlin, disguising themselves as soldiers in the process. Katya receives word of Frank's arrival in Moscow and prepares for confrontation. The team leaves Sarah to guard their entry point while Bailey leads Frank and Marvin to a concealed room where he unveils a weapon powered by red mercury, an undetectable device with no fallout. Just then, Katya confronts them at gunpoint. Frank argues that no one should possess such a weapon and persuades her to join their cause instead. While on guard duty, Sarah encounters a soldier named Pasha. Although she awkwardly repeats her one-liner, Pasha unexpectedly asks her out on a date. Caught off guard, Sarah kisses him, but Frank soon returns and knocks Pasha out cold. They retreat back into Papa John's with Nightshade and detonate explosives to obliterate their escape route. As they celebrate their small victory, Frank receives an alarming call from Victoria. She reveals that Bailey had been imprisoned because he intends to activate the weapon himself. Turning around, Frank finds Bailey aiming a gun at him, confirming Victoria's warning. Bailey despises Russia. Bailey disarms everyone and admits that he orchestrated the leak of the Nightshade document just to lure Frank into retrieving it from the Kremlin. He signals for Horton and his men to enter the room. They have struck a deal with Bailey and are there to seize Nightshade. In a shocking twist, Bailey fatally shoots Katya before making his exit, leaving Frank and his team vulnerable as Russian soldiers quickly surround them. Horton and Bailey arrive at a U.S. airbase, But Horton betrays Bailey, planning to imprison him for life and subject him to relentless interrogation. Meanwhile, Frank, Marvin, and Sarah face execution for Katya's murder, with Marvin expressing relief that it wasn't Han who had met this fate. As the soldiers prepare to fire, gunshots suddenly erupt, and it's Victoria, armed with a sniper rifle, who skillfully eliminates the soldiers, freeing Frank, Marvin, and Sarah from imminent danger. Meanwhile, Bailey is aboard a U.S. Army plane, where he discreetly extracts nerve gas from a concealed compartment in his shoe. After injecting himself with the antidote, he releases the deadly nerve agent into the cabin. With cold precision, he shoots several soldiers and kills Davis before injecting Horton with a small dose of the antidote to keep him alive for his own twisted purposes. Frank soon learns of the massacre on the plane and discovers that Bailey has taken refuge in the Iranian embassy in London, setting his sights on confronting him there. As the others board their plane, Frank is ambushed by Han, leading to a fierce confrontation fueled by their tumultuous past. Despite the tension, Frank manages to convey the urgency of the bomb threat. He throws his weapon to Han as a gesture of goodwill, tempting Han with thoughts of revenge. However, Han ultimately decides to join forces with Frank, albeit with a promise of future reckoning. Once aboard the plane, the atmosphere is tense as Frank and Han work together to strategize their infiltration of the Iranian embassy, appointing Sarah as the lead operative. While dining at a restaurant, they spot the Iranian ambassador entering, triggering their plan into action. In a moment of frustration, Frank slaps Sarah and storms out, prompting the ambassador to approach her in an attempt to calm her down. Concerned for her safety, Frank is reassured by Marvin, who reminds him that women excel in black ops, a sentiment that Frank humorously corrects as two separate truths. At the table, Sarah takes decisive action by injecting the ambassador with poison and holding him at gunpoint, compelling him to comply with her demands. She then escorts him to a waiting car. Meanwhile, Marvin infiltrates the embassy under the guise of a defector. Upon their arrival at the embassy, Sarah discreetly hands off a package to Marvin before making her way to the ambassador's office. However, her cover is nearly blown when a guard enters and questions her identity. In a swift move of self-defense, she shoots him dead. As chaos unfolds, Marvin activates a device that detonates all the toilets in the bathroom, creating a diversion that prompts the embassy to call for plumbing assistance. Victoria intercepts this call, allowing Frank and Han to enter disguised as plumbers. Inside the building, Bailey completes his weapon deal but turns on his associates with lethal intent, killing them with a knife. He then reveals Horton, bound and helpless, and sets his plan into motion by activating the bomb. Fueled by a deep-seated vendetta against the espionage community, responsible for imprisoning him and taking his family, Bailey declares his intention for revenge. As Frank and Han regroup with Marvin and Sarah, who arrives with a key to the secure room, they enter to find Horton and several guards dead alongside a ticking bomb. Frank alerts Victoria just as she enters with her weapon drawn, triggering a lockdown. Amidst the ensuing gunfight, Bailey seizes the opportunity to take Sarah hostage and makes his escape in his car. Victoria pursues them while Han picks her up in his sports car for a high-speed chase as Marvin attempts to disarm the bomb from the helicopter. Under heavy fire from Iranian guards, Han executes a daring maneuver that allows Victoria to return fire and eliminate their attackers. As Marvin struggles to disarm the bomb mid-flight, he mistakenly accelerates the timer when he cuts one of the wires. The chopper is hit by gunfire from below, forcing Frank to take control as they crash land nearby. Regaining consciousness after the crash with only 16 minutes left on the bomb's timer, Frank seizes the explosive device and commandeers a nearby car to reach Bailey's plane. In a tense showdown on the plane, Frank confronts Bailey, who has a gun trained on Sarah. Bailey forces Frank to drop his weapon and sends Sarah back to him while demanding they exit with the bomb. As Han and Victoria arrive just in time to see Bailey's plane take off, despair sets in as they realize that time is running out and that the bomb's detonation is imminent. Meanwhile, as Bailey sets his plane on autopilot, a sudden sound draws his attention. To his horror, he discovers a ticking bomb in the cockpit. Turning to Frank, he can only muster a begrudging admiration, muttering "well played" before the device detonates. In the aftermath, everyone exhales a collective sigh of relief, But Han's animosity toward Bailey has intensified. He demands an outrageous $30 million for his plane and an additional $20 million to spare Bailey's life. Yet, Frank sees the good in Han and recognizes the complexity of their situation, ultimately concluding the film with a heartfelt kiss that symbolizes hope and redemption amidst the chaos. Thank you for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe for more recaps. Until next time, have a nice day.